Good evening. I'm Lorraine Maffa, a programming coordinator for Loudoun County Public Library. Tonight's program is brought to you by the library, along with 5 Loudoun County agencies who are part of the county's collective domestic violence response team. Our first speaker is Josephine Gonzalez, the Loudoun County Domestic Abuse Response Team Program Manager. She has worked in the domestic violence field in Loudoun County for more than 12 years. In her current role, she helps Loudoun County enhance the response to domestic violence. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you so much for having us here and for the invitation. And so, as you mentioned, my name is Josephine or Joe Gonzalez, the Loudoun County DART Program Manager. And joining me are colleagues and other allied professionals who work with survivors of domestic violence in different agencies. And every single person is a member of the Loudoun County Domestic Abuse Response Team. So many times when we're asked to give presentations to community members will ask us, but what can I do? What can I do as an individual? And what I mention is the important thing is learning about domestic violence resources within your own community, understanding and learning more about the complexities of domestic violence. If you believe or suspect someone is experiencing intimate partner violence or domestic violence, to listen to them in a non-judgmental manner, just let them know you're concerned about their safety. And if anything else, to memorize the law's 24/7 hotline, which is 703-777-6552. And later on, we will discuss what laws is and what resources there are for survivors. So what is domestic violence? Well, as we know, domestic violence is an epidemic in our country, in the nation, in the world, and even in our community, Loudoun County. Many advocates across the nation use the definition of domestic violence or relationship abuse as a pattern of behaviors that one partner uses to maintain power and control over another in an intimate partner relationship. But what does that look like exactly? So before I was an advocate or started working in the field, I didn't really know what domestic violence looked like either. I just assumed it was a woman with a black eye, or that's kind of the image that just physical violence is what popped up in my head. But domestic violence is so much more than that. As you see in this definition, it's a pattern of behaviors that one person exerts. So this is what is known as the power and control wheel. It was created by experts in Duluth, Minnesota. And it was created after listening to more than hundreds of survivors. And they noticed all these different things in common. And what they noticed is that abusers or people committing harm will use emotional abuse by belittling the survivor, intimidation tactics, maybe punching a hole in the wall very close to the survivor, using coercion or threats, economic abuse. And actually, a recent Forbes article mentions that in 98% of domestic violence relationships, there's economic abuse. There's using the children, that could be through the court system or just manipulating the children as well, minimizing, denying, and blaming, such as gaslighting, so creating a reality that is not true. When I work with survivors, one good example of what gaslighting was and how powerful it is that I remember the survivor mentioned, after, almost a year of him calling me crazy, I started to think I was crazy. So those are just some examples of what domestic violence can be, aside from the physical violence, but then it's tied sometimes with that physical violence, and they're co-occurring at times, and sometimes the physical violence is not present. So the impact of domestic violence. As we know, the more common stats, which are on average 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence or 1 in 4 men experience domestic violence nationally. It's important to note that domestic violence disproportionately impacts underrepresented populations, specifically women of color. Black women, Latina women, Asian women usually experience domestic violence at almost a 50% rate. All survivors are impacted by trauma when they've experienced domestic violence. And domestic trauma is not the actual incident, it's the response to what happened. So surviving that trauma, a person may experience physical ailments or, some mental health concerns like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociation, amongst many other things. And to reduce that re-traumatization, it's imperative that all members of the domestic abuse response team and allied professionals who work with survivors are trauma informed in order for us to reduce any re-traumatization through the entire criminal justice system or court process. And ways that we do that as a team is receive more training that's domestic violence specific, know best practices, understand trauma and the effects to the brain when someone has experienced domestic violence. So how do we curb such an epidemic? Well, Loudoun County decided to adopt what is known as the Domestic Violence Coordinated Community Response. So the Domestic Abuse Response Team in Loudoun was created in order to facilitate that. And it is comprised of, it's a multidisciplinary team comprised of different professionals who work either directly with survivors or with offenders or those committing harm. And the membership ranges from law enforcement, like Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, Leesburg Police Department, to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, victim witness, community corrections, probation and parole, pretrial, laws, other advocacy organizations, and even humane or animal services. Many times people are surprised that humane services is part of our team, but I like to mention that when there is domestic violence in a home and a pet is present, 50% of the time, that pet will also experience domestic violence or some type of physical violence. So the mission of the DART is to ensure the safety of victims and families and to ensure that we're holding offenders or those committing harm accountable. We do this by working together, by collaborating, promoting this type of community awareness, receiving that training, meeting, talking about systemic gaps and such. Another way, or just another example of how the DART collaborates, or a program of the DART, is the lethality assessment program. The entire purpose of this program that has been in Loudoun since 2016 is to identify and prevent intimate partner homicides. How do we do that? By identifying who is at highest risk of lethality. So law enforcement has partnered with laws back in 2016, and this includes Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, Leesburg Police Department, and Percival Police Department now. They're our newest member, and that is to, again, help identify survivors who are at highest risk of being killed or seriously reassaulted. When a law enforcement officer goes to or is called into a domestic disturbance, if they identify that it is domestic violence, they're able to administer a screen to a survivor to then gauge if they are high risk. So from the lap screens, since we've been doing this since 2017, we have gathered some statistics, and these are Loudoun specific. Within high danger survivors who have been screened in, 66 of those high danger survivors in Loudoun report a history of strangulation, so that they have been non-fatally strangled by a partner in the past or in that current incident. 36% of high danger survivors report that they've been stalked by their former intimate partner or current intimate partner, and 37% of these survivors report the abuser has access to firearms. We highlight these three different statistics as they are some of our more what we consider higher risk factors, and we ensure to keep track of these statistics to see kind of how just trends in the community and to see what other approaches we can take as a team or other programs or policies we can implement. Another snapshot of domestic violence and statistics within Loudoun County. So prior to 2020, prior to the pandemic, Law enforcement, these are numbers from Loudoun County Sheriff's Office and Leesburg Police Department, would respond to more than 1,500 incidents of domestic violence in calendar year 2018. Then, as you can see in 2020, those numbers went up to 1,700, in 2021 up to 1,800, and then in 2022, more than 1,900 incidents of domestic violence. If you look at the numbers below, you'll see a snapshot of intimate partner homicides in Loudoun County from 2010 to 2022. So we average around 1.45 intimate partner homicides a year. This does not include all domestic violence homicides. This is specifically intimate partner. As you can see, we had a spike in 2013 and 2014 of 3 and 4. That is very high for us, for our county. And again, one is one too many. So what the domestic abuse response team is they learned of different programs that help reduce intimate partner fatalities or homicides. So they implemented the LAP in 2016. And as you know, with anything systemic, it can take a while to really see the effects or impact. And then you can see in 2018, 2019, and 2020, we had 0 intimate partner homicides, which is what our goal always is. Unfortunately, due to spikes in violence nationwide, we also saw a spike in violence again in 2021 and 2022. So, onto the famous question, why don't they leave? Many times as folks working with survivors, we get that question, why are they staying? It's important to know that on average, it takes a survivor 7 to 11 times of leaving before they leave for good. And I mean literally getting up, leaving, and then coming back. This is average. More recent research actually states it's closer to 11 times on average. So why is this? Well, I'd like to mention that first off, the onus should be on the offender or the person committing harm. It should never be, why is the survivor doing this? But many times survivors are facing fear, and rightfully so. The most dangerous time for a survivor is the first year after they leave an abusive relationship, more specifically, the first 3 months. That's why it's so important to connect them to, services within the community, because then we can talk to them about safety measures. A lot of times they're facing guilt, especially if there's children involved, even without the children involved, of course, but especially with children, because many people believe they don't want their child growing up in a one-parent home, because they think the child will be very impacted by that. Research shows that a child is actually more impacted not in a one-parent home, but in an unsafe home. There's the denial. They believe that there's the hope for change. A lot of times the cycle can be familiar. So if they grew up with domestic violence in the home, that cycle may be very familiar to them. There is, that economic and financial dependence or abuse that I mentioned previously too, due to the abuse, be it psychological, emotional, or physical. There can be low self-esteem or, again, anxiety, and it can be really hard to make decisions when facing these kinds of concerns. There's cultural norms. I worked with a few survivors actually, and they told me that their family told them that if they left that partner or they left their spouse, then they would never talk to the survivor again. So it's just important to understand different cultural norms. And of course, immigration status. A lot of undocumented people are scared to report because they're scared to be deported, or they're not aware of the laws in the country. And so their fear of deportation is higher than their fear of being in that home, unfortunately. And again, everyone deserves to live in a house or home free of abuse and to feel safe. So now I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Diana Rodriguez, and she can talk about services with in-laws for survivors.
Thanks, Joe. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So my name is, as you mentioned, Diana Rodriguez. I'm the Community Services Manager at Laws. I supervise the court and community advocates and the adult trauma therapists there, and also serve as backup to services as needed. So LAWS, Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services, that is her full official name. We are also known as Loudoun Citizens for Social Justice, and we're formally known as Loudoun Abuse Women's Shelter. That's where the acronym originated from. However, we really wanted to, for the name of our organization recent change in the last few years, to really reflect the inclusivity and that we serve all survivors of all ages in Loudoun County. Our mission is to provide victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse with safety, hope, and empowerment services to live as survivors free from the effects of violence. So what do? We provide free, confidential, and comprehensive services to, again, survivors of all ages, so adult and children in Loudoun County whose lives have been affected by domestic violence. This includes intimate partner violence, family violence, sexual assault, stalking, sex trafficking as well. Sorry for not including that. Next slide, Joe. And so I could have a whole separate presentation about all the services we provide. They're very comprehensive, but this is the main list. So the 24-hour hotline is truly 24 hours. If there is no coverage, there is always an on-call person. That 24-hour hotline is confidential. And we provide a lot of safety planning, whether it's in person or during the phone calls, during hotline calls. And safety planning looks different for everyone. If we really listen to the survivor and meet them where they're at and assess the needs and see and let them know what information's out there, give them options and for them to make an informed decision. We have an emergency shelter. It's short-term and it's in a confidential location. Short-term trauma therapy for both adults and children. We have domestic violence and sexual assault support groups, court accompaniment. I used to be an advocate before I became the community services manager, and the court and community advocate does not only court accompaniment, but all advocacy services for non-shelter survivors that we serve. We do accompaniments to forensic nurse exams. So those are exams where evidence is gathered after an assault, whether it's a severe domestic violence assault or sexual assault. Provide a lot of information and referrals to community resources and community partners. I work closely, and our team works closely with the DART team members whenever multiple agencies are involved with a survivor to just collaborate. And assistance in filing protective orders and other advocacy and assistance as needed. That is the bulk of it. And language access, I really want to accentuate. We serve all survivors. We have a bilingual Spanish, English speaking staff members. We wish we had more bilingual of other staff. However, we will always use a language line free of cost to the survivor. We want to make sure that we understand you and you understand us. And so we really like to emphasize the language access and how important it is. And we advocate for it outside of the agency as well. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we serve all survivors, regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, religion, national origin, immigration status, age, or ability. And next slide. Confidentiality. So it's really important to emphasize this. We cannot confirm or deny. This is all for the safety of the survivor. We cannot confirm or deny who is in our shelter. That includes sharing why someone was denied shelter or whether someone's there or not. That also includes we can't confirm or deny who's receiving our services. This is for their safety. Maybe a very well-intentioned family member might call me like, hey, my daughter needs help. Is she getting working with you? I referred her, or like I gave her your number. And we kind of say we can't confirm or deny. We really value and our survivor-centered, and our services are voluntary. So the survivor needs to request that service, and we respect the confidentiality primarily for their safety. Due to the Violence Against Women Act restrictions, law staff and volunteers cannot disclose information relayed by the client/survivor that we're serving unless the client signs a release of information that needs to be written out in person. The law staff member, like I said, will neither confirm or deny who's a client if releases are not signed. we're very like we can lose funding if we don't comply with this. And that includes even like law enforcement calling us sometimes. So like, hey, is this person in your shelter? And we have to say, we can't confirm or deny. I'll make note of the names that you're giving me, and that's all I can say. And it's like, thank you. The VAWA confidentiality requirements are more protective compared to HIPAA. So, you know, when some people say, oh, we're familiar with HIPAA and HIPAA compliance, it's like, no, this is even more restrictive and protective of the confidentiality of the survivor and the clients we serve. Next slide, please. So where are we? We have multiple locations. I work at the Community Services Center. That is our public location. That is where survivors can go as walk-ins when they don't have appointments. We're open Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's where our Court of Community Advocates are, where a therapist is. And so that's the main hub. Then we have the Loudoun Child Advocacy Center. That is where they conduct forensic interviews for child abuse victims. Then we have the shelter confidential location. We have a physical shelter and also alternative shelter locations to meet the demand for shelter, because our current physical shelter cannot. There's a higher demand for shelter than what are the number of beds that we have at physical shelter. And then we have the Resourceful Woman thrift store. Highly recommend you checking it out. They are open Tuesday to Saturday, and they can even refer clients. You can donate clothes if you're interested in donating items and have it go to survivors. We have a system in place on how to refer survivors to get free items from there if necessary. And also all profits or nonprofits, they go back to our agency. So supporting that thrift store is really helpful. Next slide. And finally, this is our contact information. The QR code leads to our website. We are also in all social media sites. And if you forget anything, what we've presented so far today about law services, most importantly is contact our hotline number. If maybe you're not experiencing the violence, but maybe you know somebody who is, and you want guidance on how to help them, that's a way to start. Also, you can check out our website. We can give you resources over the phone. That's it. Thank you. Oh, and I'll pass it over now to Detective Grimley.
Hello. Good evening. I am Detective Grimley with the Domestic Violence Unit in the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. Here are some important facts about reporting domestic abuse to law enforcement. Domestic violence calls for service come into dispatch as a variety of situations, from 911 hangups to noise complaints and active domestic incidents. When deputies investigate a domestic incident and identify a predominant aggressor who committed an assault, state law requires that deputies arrest the offender. When a domestic assault warrant is issued, an emergency protective order is also issued and will be active for at least 72 hours. After an arrest occurs, the LCSO personnel may reach out to the victim to help follow up on the case. The Loudoun County Sheriff's Office has created a new unit within the Criminal Investigations Division called the Victim Advocate Unit, or the VAU. The VAU connects victims of violent crime with access to a variety of resources and support services. So here are some important facts about the VAU. The VAU advocate reaches out to victims of violent crime within a few days of the incident. Advocates can help provide information on the criminal justice process in Loudoun County. Advocates also act as liaisons between the victim and various community organizations to offer access to a wide variety of support services. For example, support services may include providing victims with emergency shelter, food security, transportation needs, reimbursement for costs incurred because of crime, just to name a few. The VAU advocates can also work with the victims on cases where no criminal charges are filed, but resources are still needed or requested. For more information, you can scan the QR code on, I believe it should be on it's on this slide here, or visit the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office website included at the bottom of the slide. And as always, in case there is an emergency, you can call 911.
And now for our next speaker. She's our Victim Outreach Probation Officer, Sarah Dollard.
Thank you, Joe. My name is Sarah Dollard, and I am the Victim Outreach Probation Officer with Loudoun County Department of Community Corrections. So I work with pretrial and probation. So before I begin, I want to preface that in criminal cases, we use the term victim because the individual is a victim of a crime. When I'm using that term in this presentation, it is not intended to mean the victim of a, it is intended to mean the victim of a crime and not to classify an individual in a continued role as a victim. Next slide, please. So what services do we provide? So in general, there are several types of cases that I work with. I primarily handle domestic violence cases, which can come from both juvenile domestic relations court or general district court. At times, I also handle electronic monitoring cases that involve a victim or survivor. These would be cases in which a defendant or offender was ordered by the court to be on GPS monitoring. GPS monitoring, in a nutshell, allows our office to track the location of an individual that is placed on supervision by the court through an ankle monitor to ensure that they are staying away from specific locations. I also handle pretrial cases, which are cases that the court releases a defendant on bond and refers the defendant to be monitored by a pretrial officer. This officer makes sure that the defendant is complying with the bond conditions until their court date. I also work with our specialized group of domestic violence probation officers on cases as well. So these are cases in which a court sentences an offender, places them on supervised probation, and orders them to comply with certain conditions. Now, what services do we provide to victims and survivors? So one thing that I will do is I will reach out to victims or survivors and explain what the bond conditions are and what they mean. I will also contact victims or survivors if there are any changes or modifications to bond conditions. Bond conditions are some things that can include types of contact that a defendant is or is not allowed to have with a victim or survivor, along with ordering a defendant to comply with any protective orders that are in place. These are just a few examples of bond conditions that would be important for a victim in a criminal case to be made aware of. I'm also a direct link to the assigned pretrial officer for the victim or survivor if there are any violations involving contact that the defendant has with a victim or survivor outside of the scope of what is allowed in the court order. The other thing I do is probation conditions and compliance reviews. So with probation cases, I'm an ongoing point of contact for the victim or survivor and a liaison for the victim and survivor and the assigned probation officer. So I inform survivors of what the probation conditions are, and I'm a voice for the survivor for the duration of the probation case. Abusers tend to minimize, deny, or rationalize abuse. So survivors are the ones that have firsthand knowledge of the abuse and of the abuser's behaviors, which is extremely important insight for a probation or pretrial officer to have while supervising an individual. I work closely with the survivor to discuss their safety needs and options available if there is a violation that occurs involving contact. This can include a wide range of outcomes, but always with the survivor's safety at the forefront of how we proceed with a possible violation. A survivor can choose to have communication with me or our office. They can also choose to have any communication that they have with our office to remain confidential and not be shared with the defendant or offender. Compliance reviews are also something that happen on probation cases out of juvenile domestic relations court, and they usually happen every 90 days or so, and until an offender is about halfway through their probationary period. So this will give me an opportunity, if a victim or survivor wants it, to reach out prior to those to check in and see how things have been going and get their insight. The last thing that I do is collaborate. So we collaborate with other agency partners on a regular basis in order to provide the best possible wraparound services and resources to a survivor that we can. I work with the domestic violence detectives, victim witness case managers at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, the Family Abuse Intake Office, and laws when a survivor gives consent. Last slide. So now that I've talked about everything that we can do, there are just a few things that I want to point out limitation-wise that we cannot do. I'm not able to disclose any information about specifics regarding an offender's treatment status or progress due to privacy laws and rights that a defendant and offender has in place. I'm not able to discuss specifics of an incident relating to a pending criminal case with a victim or survivor. This is because of the impact that it could have on a pending criminal case. And then I am not able to provide or confirm specific location of an offender to the victim or survivor, and vice versa. So I wouldn't disclose an address of a victim or survivor to a defendant or offender. We're not able to disclose or discuss the results of drug screens or alcohol testing either. So this is a brief overview of what my role is as the victim outreach officer. And I want to thank you all for taking the time tonight to listen to all of us. And then I'll pass it over on to Michelle Tracy with Victim Witness.
Victim Witness Program Supervisor. Victim Witness Program is under the umbrella of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, so we are an extension of that office. Before I go into what the Victim Witness Program does and how we support survivors of crime, I simply want to say this. I'm so excited that these members of the DART team are here in this forum. We know that this presentation is being recorded, and so if it reaches just one person who's in need, or a family member or a loved one or a friend or a neighbor or an acquaintance or coworker or someone who's in need, we are so grateful. And hopefully those individuals will know that they're not alone. Next slide, please. So what a lot of people don't know is that by Virginia law statute, victims of crime have rights. And so in the Victim Witness Program within the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, we are charged with not only ensuring that victims of crime know that they have rights, but we are there to support them in those rights and make sure that those rights are met. So you'll see some general categories here of protection, financial assistance, notification, victim input, and courtroom assistance. And I'll go ahead and talk about how our team assists in those ways. And next slide, please. Before I get into how we assist, I want to let everyone know that our team, we currently have a team of 7 victim witness case managers who assist not only victims of domestic violence and interpersonal violence, but victims of any crime. And so that includes all the way from petty larceny to larceny, all the way to survivors of homicide victims. So this is how we serve every victim. And I want to just echo what Sarah had said. For our purposes, because we are serving individuals who are victims of crime, that's how we refer to those we serve as well, for only reason that they are the victim of a crime. So the first thing that our team does is outreach, advocacy, and support. So initial victim identification and contact. When a crime has been committed in Loudoun County, our office receives the charging documents and the warrants, and we also receive the identified victim information. From there, within either that day or the next day or the day after, once we have victim information, we reach out to the identified victim in every crime. Those identification can look like a telephone call if we have a telephone contact, and always mailing, if a mailing address is known, of the identified victim, a victim witness outreach support materials. From there, typically how it works is if a crime has been committed and someone is arrested, more often than not, if the person is being held, they're going to ask for bond. One of the things my team is charged with is ensuring that identified victims are aware that someone incarcerated has filed a bond motion. For two-pronged approach, what we want to do is inform them that the individual who is incarcerated is trying to receive bond and be released, and also to ask them if they have any safety concerns with regard to that individual being released. We will directly give that information to the prosecutors who are at the bond hearings so that they can relay that information to the court to ensure that they try to keep the individual incarcerated if there's a safety threat, to ensure that our team is able to make sure that that victim is safe. More often than not, if they're not already connected with laws, that means connecting them with laws. Or SARA. So part of pretrial services is we have offenders that are out on the ankle monitoring unit. We want to make sure that they're connected with SARA so that they have her information and that they can be as well as informed as possible about the ankle monitoring process. We also maintain communication with law enforcement. More often than not, victims that we serve have already made contact with either the responding deputies and or the investigators or detectives on their case. So we want to make sure that we're giving a holistic approach and holistic services and support to try to assist our victims. We also share critical information with law enforcement. So if victims need law enforcement to know something, or if there are other things happening that they want to make sure that they didn't tell law enforcement the first time, we want to make sure that they have that information. We complete outreach and give resources. Our first and foremost is we want to develop rapport and trust with those that we serve. The criminal justice system is extremely overwhelming, frustrating, and scary. It is frustrating and stressful for those of us who are there every day, let alone for folks who haven't even been introduced to it. So we want to make sure that those that we serve, we're able to develop that trust and rapport as we assist them through that criminal justice process. We share information and resources, both immediate and long-term. A lot of folks have misconceptions about the criminal justice system and court cases. So a lot of us who watch TV shows, it's all done in an hour from the event to the conviction, right? But unfortunately, the criminal justice process can be a long one, especially with our felony crimes. Those that we serve have immediate needs in the aftermath of an event, but they also have needs that come up along the way. We want to make sure that we're in tune with them and knowing how we can best serve them, but how also we can communicate with our counterparts and stakeholders to serve them as well. We inform victims of plea agreements consultations. So one of the rights that victims have in the Commonwealth of Virginia is they deserve to be informed of potential plea agreements and cases. And so we want to make sure not only do those that we serve know this, but we ensure that they are aware of any plea agreement information, or if prosecutors are thinking of plea agreements, that they have that information. We also serve as their direct liaison between our team and the prosecutors in cases. Who better to know the dynamics of an abusive relationship than those who are in it? And a lot of times, those that we serve, they know best in their relationships. And so we want to make sure that their thoughts and feelings and preferences are shared with the prosecutors in the cases, so that the prosecutors can make the best decisions they can for cases. We explain the court process. We support individuals through the court process. We facilitate attorney meetings. We provide ongoing case status updates. And we assist folks with getting to court and advocacy within court when they're there. So what does that look like? Next slide, please. Going to court. It can be very intimidating and scary. So our advocates, whether it is any part of the court hearing, so whether it's a preliminary hearing or all the way up to jury trials, our advocates are with our survivors and victims in court. I am so proud to also say law enforcement professionals, laws, DART members, Sarah, our counterparts are more often than not in court supporting survivors as well. And we are just so proud to be able to provide that wraparound support for them. In court, we assist victims with court communication preparation, accompaniment, and support throughout. The court and criminal justice process can be like a roller coaster. You think you're going one way and it's going to change into something else. And so what we find provides the most comfort for those that we serve is to ensure that they're aware of updates and information as we are. So in the courtroom and form assistance is we can assist survivors with requests for confidentiality. A lot of folks that we serve, especially in interpersonal violence, have that concern. They don't want their personal information to be out there. And in cases where there is a protective order, or they no longer want contact with the individuals caused them harm, that confidentiality means everything to those individuals. And so we're able to work with court to make sure that their confidentiality is protected. Also, living in Loudoun County, it's an incredibly culturally diverse population. And while the court system itself can be very intimidating, can you imagine having to go to court and or testify or communicate with people and they're not speaking your native language or your native tongue? How confusing and overwhelming and scary that must be. So we work both internally and externally with courtroom reporters and other assistants to make sure that victims of crime are able to speak in their native tongue. They do have an interpreter with them. For our youngest victims, court can be a very scary place. And so we're able to help children and young adults with court tours, anybody actually, with a court tour and to see what the courtroom looks like, where they'll be sitting, where other people will be sitting, to help them feel more comfortable with going to court and upcoming court case and hearings. We work very closely with the Virginia Victims Fund. Victims of crime, sometimes it's so easy to think of the emotional impact and or the physical impact, but there is a very real out-of-pocket financial impact to being the victim of a crime as well. We work closely with the Virginia Victims Fund to assist survivors of crime to applying for assistance and reimbursement for those out-of-pocket expenses. Things that include medical care, counseling, safety measures, funeral costs. We recently had a homicide survivor's family who were indigent and were not able to pay for a funeral. And without even going through the process, the Virginia Victims Fund stepped in to make sure that their loved one could have a funeral. One less thing for the survivors of this deceased individual to worry about. We provide continued resources throughout the criminal justice process. And when the process is over, if there is a guilty verdict in a felony case and or trial, a lot of survivors of crime find it reassuring and healing for them to have their final say. And so that often comes in the form of victim impact statements. They are able to submit a form or submit a letter to the court to be included with the court record. And they also have the opportunity to testify how this harm has affected them, how it's affected areas of their life personally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially. While it is completely voluntary, those that do it, our victims tell us that it does help them in their healing journey and to provide some sense of closure as this chapter closes. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is it.
That was all I had.
That's okay. That is it for me. We ask victims to go through a lot in this process, at every stage of this process. And so it's so important for DART. Loudoun County is so fortunate to have a DART that is able to walk through individuals at every step of the process and provide them with the support that they need. So thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you all so much for that very informative presentation. We do have a few questions, if that's okay. All right. How many days is emergency shelter? What is the length of long-term shelter?
I can answer that. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll go first.
So there is not a minimum. It really is at the discretion of the shelter staff, especially after doing an assessment and meeting with the survivor. It is short. There's not like a minimum amount or maximum amount, but it is a short term. It's not transitional housing, and the person must be fleeing imminent danger. So a typical can be anything from a day, like as needed, to 30 days or more, but it really is at the discretion of the advocate, the shelter advocate or shelter staff member working with the survivor.
Why are U visas not utilized?
I'll answer that. We do have U visas, and when our advocate or detective reaches out to the person involved, that is something that we can also discuss. So we do have U visas. The applications do go through the sheriff's office.
Why isn't reckless driving talked about more? Abusers use it to terrorize, control, and endanger their victims.
Sorry, Lorraine. I actually had some follow up to the visa one. That's for the sheriff's office. That answer at least is for the sheriff's office. So Loudoun or Laws itself partners with Ayuda, which is a immigration advocacy organization. It's a nonprofit as well. And if someone is a client and survivor and they come to Laws, we can directly refer them to that program to get some consultation on immigration relief.
Thank you. Back to the reckless driving question. Why isn't reckless driving talked about more? Abusers use it to terrorize, control, and endanger their victims.
I can talk a little bit about that. Not sure if anyone else has some input. That is a great, well, I wouldn't say great because it's not a good thing, but yes, reckless driving does actually happen quite a bit in intimate partner relationships as another way to intimidate the survivor. We couldn't go through the entire list of ways that people who commit harm or offenders intimidate or abuse survivors, but that is definitely something that we have seen in quite a bit of cases.
I'll add to that. If there is a reckless driving or something like that, that'll be part of the follow-up or part of the initial investigation, and we can also handle that appropriately.
Why don't Loudoun County courts utilize CASA volunteers to advocate in CHIN's cases?
I'm sorry, Lorraine, was that for CHIN's cases, Child and Youth
Yes.
Services cases?
Yeah.
So CHIN's cases are handled through the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. I'm not sure that would be within the court system themselves. So I'm not sure the reason why we don't utilize CASA volunteers. But what I would suggest is that if someone is a part of CASA and interested, to contact Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court and or juvenile probation, because they're the main players within those cases, or if anyone else has any input as well.
Thank you all so much for your time and imparting this really valuable information. We appreciate all the work you do on behalf of these victims.